play around this morning with some new equipment. We're actually going live over YouTube. We tried to set it up to record, but it didn't want to play. And after 5 attempts, I got sick of it and thought, right, we'll go live instead. So it looks like it's working now. Hopefully Bob won't have to do anything with the equipment. It will just sit there.
That'll be all right. I have no tools of any sort, so
okay.
Everything's safe.
Just yell out if you need me. I'll be in the office. But anyway, enjoy, and I'll
get
on with it.
Thank you very much. Okay, Jenny.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. You want the lights off?
Jenny Smith has been doing the cemetery. What, Jenny? What would you call it?
4 years.
The 4 years you've been doing the cemetery, what, all the headstones? Or?
No, from the records.
Records?
All the records they've got.
Right, okay. Okay, so Jenny will be addressing you this morning and then take some questions. I just might mention once meeting Jenny brought back memories to me. I was a water ranger in the 1960s up in Calcree, and we used to run a channel up through Calcree there and fill the Doon Reservoir, which was up behind the pub there at Doon. And Jenny's father and mother's farm was opposite the reservoir. Yeah, Clive, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Clive, yeah.
Clive Smith.
Yeah, good bloke. Anyhow, look, I won't hold you up anymore. How long do you think you'll be, Jenny? Would you like to speak for?
Oh, about
a day or a couple of hours? Or
3/4 of an hour.
You haven't bought lunch? Okay. Okay, I'll leave it up to Jenny now to go ahead.
Right.
Thank you, Jenny.
Well, after talking to Rhonda at the food centre, and she found me unable to shut up about the cemetery, she invited me to come along and speak to you about what's been happening at the cemetery. Most of you will have been to funerals, and so this is a video taken by Chris Dunmill about 3 years ago, and you would have probably seen the lawn cemetery where most people get buried these days. This is coming in from Davis Drive on the west, and this is the modern style of lawn cemetery with a concrete plinth between 2 rows, and the plaques are put on that concrete plinth. There's Davis Drive, and it's looking over the Leaves of Love Infant Memorial. So that's what has been erected in, I don't know how long ago, but it looks like about 10 years ago, for all the stillborn infants and the babies that died. That's for the niches, for cremated ashes. The Soldiers' War Memorial, I went to the opening of that with my father, Clive Smith. And that's an aerial view of the old style of lawn cemetery where you had plaques buried in the lawn. It makes more work. It's better than gravestones from the sexton's point of view, but you do have to clip around the edges when the grass grows. This is what's called the new extension of the cemetery. It was new in 1940. That's the entrance as it was from Calcree Road. They've just recently built a new entrance, and that's coming in from Calcree Road across the old section. All this bare ground is not bare ground. It's the old public section of the cemetery where paupers were buried and anybody who couldn't afford to pay for a grave. That's coming in the main road from Calcree Road down to the office. with part of the extension, the new extension graves on both sides there. And that's the old part of the cemetery, where not all the graves have names on them. Some of them have lost graves. There might be a fence there, but just grass inside. That's more part of the old cemetery. And there you can see the whole lot of it.
Jenny, the older part of the cemetery up there, there's been a lot of vandalism up there. Has there been any effort to reconstruct the headstones or what have you, the fencing?
Some people with relatives that really want to do a bit of work on it have done so, but not many.
Right, okay.
Not many.
There's been no concentrated effort to sort of...
No,
Okay.
no.
I don't really know what pleasure anyone would get out of desecrating
No.
a grave or how you would brag about it afterwards, but anyway, that's it. Rat bags that do it.
Yeah. Now, they first surveyed an area for the cemetery in 1851. It was only 10 years after Horsham was first settled by white people. And at that stage, there were a few houses, a pub, a police station and Langland store in Horsham. The cemetery was planned as a rectangular area, 8 chains by 10 chains, and it was 1 mile north of the Bailey Street and Firebrae Streets intersection. It was divided into quarters for Episcopalian or Church of England, Presbyterians, Roman Catholics and others. In 1877, the cemetery commenced officially with a sexton appointed, but before that, or not long afterwards, they had to revise that original survey plan, and they decided to make the Presbyterians in the top, in the northwest corner, the Roman Catholics in the southwest corner, Anglicans sort of in the east, coming out to Kalki Road, and Methodists were subdivided from the Presbyterians with the section across the north. As each of those religious denominations was appointed a trustee on the Cemetery Trust. These sections at the bottom, Lutheran and Church of Christ, were hived off, I think, from the Catholics and the Anglicans as new migrants came in from South Australia. And the section over here to the right was for paupers and hospital patients. The hospital paid for the burials of those people. And I think they always had a minister there, but these were usually people that didn't have any relatives or very poor families, and there were an awful lot of children buried here. There were travelling labourers and people working on stations, and a lot of people without family in Australia. In 1877, that's when the cemetery officially started, and they appointed a sexton and recorded the burials. As well as his normal pay, he was given a bonus after every 100 burials, which gave him an incentive to record all of them, and even the stillborn children. The graves in the old section in all of this were just numbered starting from number 1. And there was no indication as to where the grave was, except for which compartment it was in. So it would be Presbyterian grave number 1, and then number 2 might be in the Anglican section. So it was very difficult to find them. They had cast iron tags made up, and they were just jammed in the ground, sort of little round things on metal. But most of them have disappeared. They got accidentally buried with just windblown sand, or thrown around, or broken, whatever. In the early days, say the first 100 years, funerals were usually held 1 or 2 days after death, and there would be just a service by a minister, either at the church or the graveside. No eulogies, no slideshows, and sometimes they had an extra service by the masons or the returned servicemen. They'd be pallbearers or have a march to the grave. And from about 1900 onwards, the newspaper, the Horsham Times, printed obituaries very quickly, often the day after the death. And they can be read nowadays by looking at the website Trove, which is set up by the National Library of Australia, and you can see any of the newspapers from 1882 through to 1954. Unfortunately, Trove ran out of money, and so we haven't got anything later than 1954 that's readily available. They'd often put in a second obituary after the funeral just to say who were the pallbearers and the minister and all that sort of thing. In 1940, the old section was getting full, and they expanded it to the south. So it's this bit south of the Anglican section, or that's not the road. This is the road in from Kalkee, but it's further to the south of the old section. The Anglicans got that northern bit. The Presbyterians and Methodists combined for the southern bit. The Catholics were on the west. It was basically a continuation of one of their compartments here. There was a section of 5 rows set aside for the returned soldiers. And here they at last had the idea of putting graves in proper rows, labelling the rows with letters, and then numbering the graves down the rows. So once you knew that somebody was in Anglican F6, you knew where to go. And that made things much simpler. You could still have monuments in this section. So it wasn't like the lawn cemetery, but at least they were locatable. The graves, people were a bit more affluent, so that even though 1940 in the war, but after the war they were more affluent, and more people had gravestones. There were fewer unmarked graves. And they were more often made of concrete. In the old part of the cemetery, they were often iron fences on red gum curbs because they thought red gum lasted forever, but it doesn't. It's nowadays you can still see some of the old red gum, but it's not much of it. Now that's the aerial view of the cemetery. So there's the old section. This is the new section where you can see that the graves are in the rows. And then in 1965, they expanded to the lawn, which is this bit. over to the west. They didn't worry about the Christian denominations anymore. Everybody was mixed in together, but it was in rows and numbered along the rows in order to be able to find a grave again. This is the first lawn section where there were plaques buried in the lawn, or placed in the lawn, but now the lawns have grown up a bit. And then later on, they moved to this newer lawn section where they've got the concrete plinth down the middle and graves each side of it. And you can only put flowers and things on the concrete plinth. This is the rose garden. It's now got two walls for cremated ashes, and they're going to build a second rose garden at some stage. At the moment, they're building a base for a rotunda there so that people going out to the cemetery can have somewhere to sit if it's a very hot day or if it's raining. And at the moment, there's no shelter. And that's one of the walls for cremated ashes, and that's the infant garden. Cremations started at Ballarat in 1958, and the walls with niches were built about 10 years later. The rose garden was created in 2004, and you can also plant ashes along the edges of the garden beds in the curb. The cremations are a lot more popular than burials these days, partly because of cost and just changes in the way people feel about things. But ashes are often scattered elsewhere or kept at home in a cupboard, so that unfortunately there aren't as many plaques or memorials going to be created at the cemetery, which will make it harder for people doing family history. Now, my main interest in the cemetery was the records, the data, because I was a statistician and I was always interested in data. This is all burials are recorded in books, large books called registers. There was also the sexton's book, which is this one. This is the first page of it, and it was where they'd write the first, when they were first contacted, that there will be a burial. This was 1877, March the 1st. The denomination was important for all sorts of reasons back then. And the first person buried was Helen Collins, age 30, private grave. She was number 1, and she was in the Presbyterian compartment, and they recorded the hour of interment. In later years, the sexton also recorded the undertaker's name, the minister's name, the depth of burial, and whether it was the first or second in the grave. The trustees at the Horsham City Council, or with the help of the Horsham City Council, recorded all the burials independently. So they had their own records, and this is the same lady on number 1, early in March. That was her married name, Mrs. W.A. Collins of Wale, and they were recording also the rank or occupation. For women, they often put down the occupation of the husband, or they put home duties, HD. The minister performing the ceremony and the number of the grave. And the compartment. But here they didn't bother recording it. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Now, you can all read that handwriting, no doubt, but the younger people couldn't. I grew up when I was still exposed to script like this, so I can read it, but sometimes it gets a bit hard. It depends a lot on the handwriting of the person. Here's an example in 1918 where it's quite nice writing there, and then a different person's handwriting here. But the beauty of these registers is that they're still there. Some cemeteries lose their records for the first 50 years. Minyip has done that. And when they tried to compile a list of who was in the cemetery, they had to rely on people's memories.
Those are still kept on a written record?
Yes.
Jenny?
Only paper lasts.
Yeah, that's right. You don't, yeah, if you push the wrong button, it doesn't just disappear like these things. Yeah.
No. At the trustees, they had various council clerks write in the trustees register, but they gave numbers of the graves to the adults, but not to the stillborn children. So they had to squash them in wherever. And they often didn't put in much detail about the stillborn children. You get the occasional one that just says stillborn of Smith, which is pretty useless. There were an awful lot of stillborns. This is in 1942, and there's still a lot of stillborn kids. The person in 1929, Harold Round became the sexton, and he had beautiful handwriting where you can, it's lovely and readable. And he gave lots of useful detail. But after a few years, his writing became very flowery and it became a bit harder to read. You can still get there, but I think somebody must have told him you've got to simplify it a bit. And he was there for over 20 years. This is the last register that he entered data in. This was the part of the new extension, the Horsham Cemetery extension, and it started in 1940, so the paper is not very good. And for reasons that escape me, they were writing in green ink at one stage. But he died on the 25th of June, 1951, and Lillian Exel was his last entry down there, and then he was the next burial. It was his assistant sexton who buried him. And this is a recent register by the sexton. The sexton's Lee Ballinger, and he's been there for over 20 years. And he writes all in block letters, and it's very clear, and he's accurate. They're now recording dates of birth and death, which they didn't before, and that's been happening since about 2000. And the undertaker's name, the burial right number, the depth of the burial, 1.7 metres for a second in the grave, and 2.1 metres for first in the grave. In about 1990, or in the 1990s, they thought they'd better put it on computer. And so they used Excel. Some people here might have used Excel. You just sort of open it up and start typing, and they created these registers, a separate one for the old section, the new extension and the lawn, and entered up all the details. But there are a lot of problems with Excel. If you don't, you can just type away and you can have all sorts of different date formats, which makes sense to you, but you can't sort them, you can't find them. And they were using this up till 2021, when I decided or offered to the cemetery to make a database that they could search with, because they get a lot of inquiries at the cemetery for people wanting to find their relatives. This one was just, this Excel spreadsheet was just in order of burial. So if you wanted to find Jenkin, you'd be hard put to find them. I mean, there are facilities in Excel now that you can, but the sextons were not strong on computer skills, and so it was hard for them. But I offered to make a database because I like making databases. And I've made one that I incorporated all the data from the Excel spreadsheets, including some from Ian Rees, who's in the Genealogy Association. A lot of people might know him. He'd been creating his own spreadsheets and collecting the data from headstones since about 2006, 2007. And he had also figured out where all the monuments in the cemetery were from maps, the monuments in the old section. When I started making this database and putting it all together, he photographed all the pages of the registers, so a separate photograph for each page, so that I could sit at home and read the data without having to use the original books, because they're historical articles and they're too precious to be handled all the time. This database is very simple as far as databases go. All the data are in just one table, and I've made it, it's got 15,496 people in there. I've checked them all against the registers, and that's why it took quite a few years. You can sort them any way you like. When the sextons are entering data, they sort with the latest one first, and I go out to the cemetery once a month and get the latest. So that's from 20th of April 2025. But you can also, what they use is they add a new burial. So they just start off with a blank form that has all the data required for the burials. The names, ages, dates of when they were birth and death, their burial right numbers, and depth of grave and all that stuff. And we also record other things that might be on headstones, like the nicknames of people, the former names for women who've changed their names on marriage, occupation, cause of death, which we only get from old registers, military service for all the war graves, if they have it written on the headstone. I'm now getting the latitude and longitude of every grave from various sources, and the genealogical information, which is from births, deaths and marriages. We can get record dates of registration, or the year of registration for deaths up to 30 years ago, for marriages up to 60 years ago, and births up to 100 years ago. And they have to, you can't get more recent stuff without paying money for a particular death certificate.
So is this all accessible by,
On the internet.
it's on the internet?
Yep.
So accessible to anybody?
Yep. But because it's 30 years ago for a death, you know, I can currently get deaths up to the 26th of May, 1995. But I can't get information from any of the later ones. If you want later ones, you have to look at death notices in the Weekly Advertiser or the Mail Times, or get it off plaques. But people don't often write their parents' names on plaques or headstones.
Yeah.
So if you want to get parents, you've got to go through the births, deaths and marriages.
Yeah. Yeah.
The trouble is that births, deaths and marriages aren't perfect in regards to their data. And, you know, you get different names for the parents, perhaps from the death registration than the birth registration.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we can search by any surname. I'll try Jenkin because Rhonda Coffey asked me to concentrate on them. They're the 6 Jenkins buried in the cemetery. Hugh Jenkin died not only 23 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of you might know him. We got his date of birth and death from the register. The undertaker was written in the register, the depth of burial, and where his last address was. I've written comments for each person if I have, you know, if there's discrepancies between records. In this case, I couldn't find his birth record in Victoria or Tasmania. And I don't know where, I haven't been able to get the death registration yet because it's in 2002 and I can't go any later than 1995 at present. His marriage registration was before 1965, or he got married before 1965, so I've got that, but I don't know where he was born. I've searched on a surname there, but you can search on any part of the name, like, you know, if you wanted Ballinger, you could just put L-I-N-G, and that would get up mostly Ballingers, but some other people that have Ballinger in their given name, or Mellings, or anything with L-I-N-G in it. Could sort by location, so if they were in a particular lawn or the rose garden, you could just sort by rose and get all the rose garden ones. And you can sort by the mother's name, say Elsie, or the father's name, any part of the father's name. And then you can print a report on each person. So if I go back to the Jenkins, I could print a report on, say, Lorna. No, I'll get an older one. So this Richard Jenkin from 1939, and print his report, and it comes up. Oh, I can't make it. Oh, there it is. So that it prints out all the information we've got on where he was buried, his parents, his wife, and any other information we've got, and then a comment about where his obituary is. I found it online. So the sexton out at the cemetery can do this and print it off for anybody. Is there anyone you would like me to look up, one of your relatives?
I tried to find my grandfather who's buried in Horsham
All right. And what's his name?
Not Joseph, not. So all I do is ask.
And about when did he die?
I think he was 42. My father was the oldest of 6 children at 12, and he had to leave school to go out and work for farmers to try and help his mother and the other kids.
Yeah.
And I went to somebody in Kingston Street next to the theatre, and they give me this map of the courts. And they give me a number, and it's straight opposite this big headstone.
Right.
And my cousins come up from Melbourne. So they wanted to find it. Well, we couldn't find any numbers, we couldn't find anything
No.
in the air. It was hopeless, and they were that disappointed.
Well, that would be this guy, I think. He was 40.
42.
We haven't got anybody 42, but we've got Joseph Mott there.
Yes.
The ages are difficult. This looks like him. He was buried in the public section in 1924, 30th of September 1924. And his age was 41 in all the cemetery records, but 40 in the BDM births, deaths and marriages deaths. Usually I believed the births, deaths and marriages registry, but really they get the ages off what the undertaker writes on the form, so that, you know, sometimes they can be wildly different. And also you can use what's in the obituary published in the paper, if there is one. Yes, they said there was an appeal for help for the family in the Horsham Times on the 10th of October 1924, page 8. So that, yes, that family of 12 that you mentioned was...
Six.
Six.
6 children.
Oh, 6 children.
And my father was the oldest, he was 12. He
Oh,
was
I
in
see.
grade 6. He had a Moraja.
Yeah,
And his father was a drover, so they should be
right.
driving sheep. And he used to do a lot of farm work for farmers too.
Yep.
Most of the time I lived in 2-room houses for these children.
Yeah, it's amazing
It
what
was pitiful.
what life was
See,
like.
Dad was earning 5 shillings a week.
A week.
A week, and he'd take that to his mother. He was working on farms that out from Norraja. Lower Norton, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And yeah, we ended up working for McDonald out there, and he had a sister that wasn't married and still living in the original farmhouse, and Dad used to stay with her.
Rather than having to walk back home each day.
No, he only went home a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks and take 10 backwards. But it would be 10 shillings, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
It was hard going backwards. Yeah,
Yeah.
they were really disappointed, my cousins that can't. And then they had a piece out of a paper, and it was a funny mob that got a murder out at Moravia. So we went out to the cemetery. It's the most beautiful little kept cemetery I've ever seen. And beautiful grade form.
right.
Stone, it was beautiful, and that was back in the 1920s too.
Yeah. Was she his sister?
She, I don't know where she come in the family. She, from what's come originally, come from England, and Mott Cottage in Port Fairy,
Right.
their brothers to us. So, yeah, they come from England.
Yeah.
So we traced them back to England. I can't remember where they come from. But yeah, they come out from Wales. They were
Yeah, a lot of people came from England and Ireland, and
But it just, I was disappointed for them.
that there was nothing to see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They just thought, oh, look at this, we've got the map, we've got the numbers, and the way they went. The grass was pretty rough. I said, look out for a snake. I wouldn't be a snake, it was a surprise.
yeah,
But I just would have liked to have been able to take it then straight to it, you know, on
yeah. It's pretty hard to identify those locations because there's nothing to go by. It's just a large expanse. My husband's working on a map now. The oldest map that we've got was 1894, and it was drawn up properly, and then they wrote numbers on, sometimes names, sometimes numbers.
I could have brought the map with me, but I'm not doing it.
Yeah, but this map was rolled up and rattling around the cemetery office for over 100 years. So it's not in good shape. My husband flattened it out and tried to restore it as much as he could, but it had deteriorated in large chunks. Been coffee spilt on it. Somebody left a tin of paint on it. Down the bottom, it's particularly bad. Somebody else was given the job of tracing it in 1978 and copying all the numbers onto a new map, but they weren't very good, and they made a lot of mistakes. And Peter Ackroyd, my husband, is currently working off a 2016 aerial photo of the land as it is now and the gravestones, and trying to fill in the numbers on those gravestones and the gaps in between to at least allocate a number, but even to the empty spaces. But he won't be able to do it in the public section because this is where there's hardly any graves, nothing, no sort of landmarks. So it's going to be difficult. But yeah, if anybody else would like to search on a relative, I can print off any reports you want. I can save them as a file, and then Trish can give them out off the printer here. we're getting about 100 graves a year at present. So that's the just numbers of burials per year. So 2025, we're only part of the way through the year. Last year there were 145 altogether, 18 ashes and 125 burials. And we, from births, deaths and marriages, we got extra information from their death registry that went back before 1877, so right back to 1853, they could tell us of people who'd been buried in Horsham. I'm not perfectly sure that they're right. They've got 2 in 1853, 1 in 1854, because they just had them in the Horsham area, and some of those might have been buried at the Walmer station or Longanong or Wonwanda. But yeah, got their names in there for what they're worth.
Jenny, has there been any effort made to register the graves from the old stations? Because there are burial sites out at Longanong, burial sites down on the Wimmera River, at the old stations.
No. No. A number of gravestones from Wonwanda were brought in and placed at the Horsham Cemetery, and they're still in there.
Right.
They're very old.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of the old sandstone gravestones have sort of eroded away, so you can't read the names.
Well, stations, first station, 1842.
Yeah, out at Longanong or Brim Springs.
Brighton was 1842.
Yeah. Yeah. But we've also, I'll just set up a couple of queries on it so that the most common surnames, the one in Horsham Cemetery, the most common surname is Smith, of course.
Yeah.
3 times as many as the next surname, which was Brown. And so there's Smith, Brown, Wilson, Mackley, Mills and Ballinger. An awful lot of Ballingers.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're bred like rabbits. Yeah. If you don't strike a Ballinger, you're not in the Wimmera.
Yeah, well, the Smiths obviously had a lot of rabbits too.
Yeah.
I could look up McIlvena, but it's not a very common name.
No, yeah, most Robert's buried down in Stawell.
There's only one.
Mum's here.
But yeah, I can print it out for anyone who wants one.
The Irene Mobile.
Yeah, that's your mum?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, it's been quite an exercise.
Yeah, that's
going through the data, and I'm still. Well, we installed it at the cemetery in August last year, and the sexton's been using it ever since. He's found it much easier for looking up things and entering the data, and the maps that Peter's scanned, or he's restored and flattened and scanned them so that they can now look them up on the computer and enlarge them so they can read them without having to use the original old maps. So that the originals are now stored in archives at the Horsham City Council to keep them safe.
thank goodness there's people like yourself around to do this sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I just, because I was a statistician, I like cleaning up data.
Yeah.
And this was asking for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm pleased that the sexton really likes it.
Yes, yeah.
And we don't have the situation of people in two places entering data, and they're inevitably going
Yeah.
to be wrong
Yeah,
or have discrepancies. So it's all entered now at the cemetery office by the sexton, and every time he closes the database, just clicking on the button down the bottom, it creates a backup and sends it off to the council. So they've got their
Oh.
own copy as a backup,
right.
and also it creates an Excel spreadsheet that they're used to looking up, and that's the latest data, and it goes off to them.
Right.
They get inquiries too.
Yeah. Have you done the cemetery at Polkemmet?
No, I haven't done any other cemeteries.
Right.
Lee O'Connell did the cemetery at Minyip and Sheep Hills and Banyina,
Right.
and they've got a rotunda set up with lovely display boards of all the names in the cemetery. They've done a terrific job,
Yeah.
especially Minyip, which is the one I've seen.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to perhaps eventually get something like that. But the trouble is 15,000 names are too many.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it'd be nice to have an accessible computer set there that people
Yeah,
could just search on,
Yes.
but
yeah.
it would get vandalised.
Yeah. Yeah.
But eventually, when there's a rotunda, we're hoping to put Peter's aerial photo with numbers on it up, and if people have got a report from the office that says what their family's numbers were, they'll be able to find them. You can easily find anybody in the new extension or the lawn cemetery, because you just look for E64 or
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I've often wondered why, well, maybe there has been an effort made to have a look at the old squatters' diaries. Most of the squatters kept a diary. A lot of them are in Canberra. Some of them were down in Melbourne. So, because they would have, I would say, had burials on the stations. There's a lot of people worked on the station.
Yeah,
They were little towns of their own, but had a store and a carpenter shop, and everything. But anyhow,
well, the family Bibles would have had members of the family
Yes,
who died, but but all the labourers on those stations
yes,
wouldn't have had a record like that.
I don't know, talking to Jim Hurt, I think Wanda had one.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
the trouble is people sometimes use different names. There's
yes,
one that I found, spent some hours on, that was recorded as James Francis in all the cemetery registers, but there was nobody of that name in births, deaths and marriages, and there was a James Fraser.
Yeah.
And so you don't know which is right.
No, well, a lot of them, a lot of the records were changed. Some, and you can imagine some of the people. Well, I know my wife often tells a story of Larkins was her name.
Yeah.
And I just forget which, back in her family, who it was, were getting married, and the priest said, well, L-E-N, we can't have that, that's Catholic, we're going to change it to INS for some reason.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people coming off the ship in the early days, and they were keeping a register as they come off the ship. You can imagine some of the accents that came off it. They spoke to them. Yeah, and I know my own name. If I typing McIlvena in the computer, at the finish I look back and it's double-N-A.
Oh, right.
Now that's how they spell it. The American mob are double-N-A.
Oh, I see.
So, yeah.
Well, even names like Jenkin, it can be Jenkinson.
yeah,
Had a lot of trouble with Hutchinson, and it can have Hutchison,
yeah.
Hutchin.
Yeah, well, that Bellinger, there's B-A-N-G-E-R, and then E-N-G-E-R, and then I-N-G-E-R, and then B-E-double-L. It's yeah.
So my name's, married name is Blackley. And I do.
Blakely.
Calls for Mrs. Blackley, Mrs. Blackley, anything but Blackley. And when I say to people what my surname, how do you spell Black? And I say it's just Black with only Y on the end.
Yeah, but it could be just L-Y.
Yeah.
It could be Blakely, Blakely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people change their names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's about it. It must be morning tea time.
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether the urn's on or what's happened. Any questions for Jenny?
I'm going to build another wall, then we'll bring this retainer out there. I'm going to build another section for the ashes there as well.
Yeah, there's two walls in the rose garden that's there at present. They're going to build another rose garden with more walls. And when the existing lawn cemetery fills up, they're going to, the pointy bit, Kalki Road and Davis Drive, there's a sort of paddock, and that's the Horsham Cemetery Reserve. They'll have to expand into there. They've been dumping soil there for a while.
Yeah, it always looks messy there in that corner.
Yeah,
Don't know what they can do about it. I guess they just dig a hole and put the stuff up there and dump it.
Eventually it'll get used.
Yeah.
They've had a school group over in the last year that planted trees all around the edge, so all around that triangular bit of land.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, and so eventually it'll get used.
Yeah.
But it'll be past my time. Where are we? There's the aerial view. See, there's that triangular reserve up the top. That's really the only place left they can go.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got trees maybe there now, haven't
Yes, yeah, they're the ones that a school group came over. They were here from Adelaide. And they've planted trees all around the edges.
I wish they'd get rid of those other old shrubby trees that are along past the infant past the right along. They're half dead and they're falling.
What, along Davis Drive?
Along,
Yeah, they mostly in the cemetery now. They're planting pear trees, ornamental pear trees.
they're nice.
Some of these old trees are a real problem. We've had a lot of trouble with this palm tree, which would have been not planted, just a seed dropped by a bird, and it's grown up and sort of completely demolished a couple of graves. And there's still ones underneath, but they're all sort of pretty well wrecked. But if you, to get rid of that palm tree, you'd be digging up a lot of bones. It's,
Yeah, problem.
Horsham Cemetery do something like they're doing in England at the moment, is where they're cremating people, but planting them with an oak seed, so that as the oak tree grows, it develops into a garden area. So they're going to put seating in.
oh, that sounds nice. Which you could,
Sounded nice.
yeah, as long as you've got a plaque.
You need a lot of room. Yeah, there's a plant on back and gets put on in front of the tree while it's growing, but there's going to be bushland, and as part of the regenerating the old trees.
Yeah.
They're doing all that now instead of burial
in the cemetery as we know it now.
Where's that to?
They're doing that in England apparently, part of the reforestation program, to get rid of the no tree seed.
Well, you'd have to have a lot of space. You'd have to have one oak tree sheltering 100 people with ashes.
Yeah, I was thinking it sounds like there'd be a lot of oak trees in a small area over in.
Yeah, they couldn't have one per person.
Yeah, that sounded nice though, come back
Yeah.
to the tree.
Is there any word and any talk of them going in for vertical burials?
I've heard of that with Ballarat,
They're doing it in Japan and a lot of other places.
but these days about 70% of people get cremated. It's an awful lot cheaper,
Yeah.
and 70%, according to Trevor Bisow. See, we don't see them at the cemetery because people keep them, the ashes, they scatter them in the person's favourite spot, or I
You
know.
were saying, Jenny, you were thinking of planting pear trees out there.
Yeah, they're planting pear trees between the lawns. See those lines of trees, and some people put ashes under the pear trees and just have a bit of a boulder there with a plaque on.
I was thinking, that's true. Oh, you're thinking of the corellas that do the damage to pear trees in your area.
Oh,
You
Now
must-
I'm thinking of the leaves.
Oh, the leaves they drop.
Who's going to clean up the leaves?
All right, yeah.
yeah, they're on. They're sort of in gardens, like median strips. The leaves wouldn't be that much of a problem, I don't think.
If you drive up Knoll Street in Horsham, you might find there quite a problem.
Oh,
You wouldn't be at the cemetery, except windy, the leaves would end up there anyway.
yeah,
That's true.
Yeah.
So windy.
Now for the Blue Pine Cemetery.
Which planes?
Blue Pine Cemetery.
all right.
And we were there yesterday, my husband's buried there. And there's lots of rocks, very big rocks with just the plaque on it.
Yeah,
Well, that's happening here too.
Yeah,
It's quite a few.
and I said, this is going back with, I've been in Horsham living there for 17 years, but I was 46 years out of Blue Pine. And I said to Garth and Ivan Smith, Ivan's still alive, but Garth's passed away, they were in charge of the cemetery, and I said about this. And they said that people drive around looking at little cemeteries, and they pick one that they like, and that's where
they put their
come
ashes.
up and get buried there.
Oh,
Well, when we were out there yesterday, there's a lot more that used to be there when my husband died 30 years ago.
right.
Yes,
So,
they're coming up to see if they grab you, so we'll laugh to like looking at mountains. That's good.
yeah, I would have thought most people would bury, where they've got a connection to a place rather than just because it looks pretty. But yeah, each to their own.
Yeah, everybody's got different ideas of what should happen. Some people, cremations against burials. Some people like the ashes
Yeah,
with them at home.
yeah,
Others scatter them around roses or up in the bush. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you can,
Everyone's different ideas.
yeah. Yeah, well, my father died in 2017 and he was able to get a grave in the new extension, one of these monument sort of things that they still had a space, and he was able to get a spot in the next row from his parents.
Oh, right.
And my mother was cremated, and we put her ashes in the coffin. So.
Yeah, a lot of cemeteries have the dad and the mum and the
Yeah.
grandparent, the whole family together.
Yeah, and it's good if you can.
If you can arrange that. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people can reserve land, they can pay for it in
In
advance,
advance.
so that they are all together.
Yeah. Okay, are there any more questions for Jenny? Anybody else would like to ask? If there's not, thank you very much, Jenny. That's been very interesting. And once again, it's so good to know that people like yourself are about to record this sort of thing like it. Our history's going fast enough, and we're being bombarded with other history. It's like they're trying to eradicate the Aussie out of the road. In fact, in the way they're going, we're going to be outbred. Anyhow, thank you once again, Jenny.
That's all right.
There's a present in the bag there for Jenny too.
In the bag.
Yeah.
That's right. It says, thank you, Jenny. There you are. A small gift token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
Lovely of you to give you time to come up and talk. Thank you. I'll put the line up.
That looks very nice.
So it's something someone's painted?
Oh, it's a plate.
JB Lane.
Yeah, Joyce. Oh, isn't that pretty?
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's Joyce Lane's work. Joyce.
And it's got gilding on it. Some of them
Yeah.
gold.
Yeah. Okay. What happens with all the electronic gizmos now?
Oh, I can turn the camera around to you then, Bob.
Oh, right. Do you want to have a bit of a break, or you want to just? That's one thing seems to be a little bit odd here. But do you want morning tea or not? You soldier on. Okay, what are we going to do? Oh,
I'll turn the camera around on you.
okay.
Oh, yes, it's very, yeah, see the names on graves.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Alabama.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll sit down and take.
So we'll just.
Okay, we, I think on the agenda I was supposed to talk on the first, where's my diary? There. On the first European to set foot in the Wimmera. Yeah. Which of course was the Major Mitchell. Seeing I left home in rather a hurry this morning. Once I figured out what day it was, I was supposed to be here. So, with your permission, we'll do that again. And I grabbed on the way out work I'd done many years ago on the first business people to come into the Wimmera is the Langlands family, which everybody is familiar with. The first, yeah, back under the first people in the Wimmera, of course. We'll acknowledge the tribes that were here, the Aborigines, the Jardwa, the Watchaballik, and there were 5 tribes in all, and they still have representatives here today. Appointed, naturally, they're not relatives, but they do represent the 5 tribes. And if you're doing any dealing with the cooperatives here, the main cooperative here is Barinji Gajin. And you'll meet with the 5 representatives, or the 5 tribal leaders, as they call themselves. But then the explorers Mitchell and Edward John Eyre came through. Mitchell came through. I won't go into Mitchell because that's another story, but I just tell you a little bit of interest, a little bit of information I got from Elsie Lang. Anyone remembers Elsie out at, anyone remember Elsie? Out at Natty? Lovely old lady, yeah, full of history, lovely. And she gave me a letter that she had from a relative of Mitchell's. And apparently we look on Mitchell as being an explorer given task by the government to come down here. But what happened, it goes back a bit further than that. In the Blue Mountains up in New South, within the 1830s, Governor Burke got this new surveyor, Mitchell, out from Scotland. He came out and he got him to go and survey a road across the Blue Mountains. And he told him where he wanted it to go, roughly. Burke was a Catholic, Mitchell was a Presbyterian, and they were not very good friends. Burke was from the lower end of the social scale, and Mitchell was born into the, the upper echelon of the families there. Anyhow, Mitchell went out into the Blue Mountains to survey this road, and he found a better route, a more practical route, and an easier to construct route. So he went against Burke's wishes to construct this road, and he really fell out of favour. About this time, New South Wales was getting overpopulated in the 1830s with the people coming across from all other countries. And he knew that Australia was a much larger place, and he wanted to know what the area was like down southeastern Australia. So he thought, well, this could serve 2 purposes. One, I could perhaps find out what's down there. Is there any headhunters or cannibals or wild animals, or is it suitable for occupation of people? Or I get rid of Mitchell forever. And that's how Mitchell came to lead an expedition down here. I'll just finish with one other point, that Mitchell was trying to gather troops together to come down with his expedition, and Burke, having this intense dislike of Mitchell, said, well, just to help you out a little bit, I'm going to give you a staff of 24 to take on this expedition with you. But I'm going to bring them out of prison, and they'll be all criminals. And if by any chance they happen to come back, then I'll give them their freedom. So, you know, it really made everything crooked. This is a story. Yeah, I wrote this on the Langlands family many years ago. I've got a poem here. Yeah, it's written by Banjo Patterson. I'll just read it out. But now the times are slow and dull, the brave old days are dead, when hardy bushmen started out and fixed their way ahead by tangled scrub and forests grim towards the unknown west, and spied at last the promised land from off the range's crest. That was just a poem by Banjo Patterson. Following the explorers, when Mitchell got back to Sydney, he became very famous for having discovered this land down here he called Australia Felix. Felix being wonderful, beautiful, good, all good things. And he said there was plenty of timber and plenty of water and ready for the occupation of man. So it hit the papers, and it also went to England, Scotland, Ireland, and that brought the squatters over. The first, of course, was James Monckton Darlin, who came here in 1842, and he settled just up off the Doon Swamp, between the swamp and the river. The site, yeah, I could go right to the site. It's down the hill from the Doon Golf Club. That's where he settled there. The Aboriginal name for Doon, of course, is meeting place. And apparently they used to hold corroborees and rituals and what have you there. It was Darlin, of course, that gave the land for the city or the town to develop, naming it after his place in Sussex in England, where he used to go on holidays. The actual name of Horsham, according to his diary, is very, very strange. And the name Horsham actually means horser, which is a Saxon word for hand, being the same as our word home. That's all he said. The Aborigines called it Bongambilla, which is, in their language, it's a place of flowers. And in Langland's diary, he mentioned that down by the river was just a mass of wattles. So, actually, just before the Langlands got here, was a detachment of mounted police came here because of the sheep stealing was going on. The squatters requested the government to get some assistance up here because the Aborigines were knocking the sheep off. I guess you know the story. They used to grab a few sheep, take them away and break their legs so they couldn't run away, and then use them for meat. and that, yeah, what was his name? Henry Dana was the leader of the police. And they set up camp down on the corner of Darlot and Hamilton Street. Probably across the road, I reckon, where remember the old sale yards? Down in that area there, that's about where they were. James Monkton Darlot squatted, as I said, out of Doon, and started farming. He stocked the land, got the sheep, got plenty of sheep out there, and started to farm it. He had some trouble with a piece of his machinery, and of course there was nothing around here or nowhere where he could get it repaired. So he took it down to Melbourne. And he took it down to a foundry there, and the foundry was owned by two Langlands boys who had been out, migrated out earlier. It was the largest employer of men in Melbourne, and also constructed the first train in Australia. And does anyone know Banana Alley in Melbourne? It's down Swanson, Flinders Street, just for the underpass. There's a whole line of brick buildings there, little separate shops. That's where the foundry was. Just down from Spencer Street Station. And while he was there, he mentioned to the Langlands boys that the trouble that he had to go to get anything at all in the way of supplies, food, and equipment and sort of thing. And he used to have to go to Geelong or to Melbourne by wagon, take weeks. So they said, well, we've got a brother George thinking about coming out here. We'll write to him. So they wrote to George, and George migrated out here. The brothers were called Henry and Robert. The Langlands family came from the Scottish city of St Andrews. George, 1849, George, his wife and young family of 5 decided to come up to the Wimmera to start a store so that he could supply the stations. Stations at that time were Wonwanda, Walmer, Polkemet, Vectus. And that one I always forget, I can't remember the name, up on the Ariambia. Yep, anyway, forget it. Yeah, he had a family of 5 people, 5 kids. George died early, and he had his family carried on the business after he established it down on the corner of, down where that bike shop is. That's where the Langlands building was. He started off there selling out of his wagon. His wife's name was Bessie, or Betsy. One of his kids, Margaret, married E.J. Stevens, the founder of the Horsham Times. They came up here by bullock wagon, And the trouble, people had to go to in those days to do anything at all must have been very difficult. They travelled via Mooney Ponds. They had a wagon drawn by oxen. Never had horses in it. Well, I find that a bit strange. No horses, they had oxen, which, seems to be a little bit difficult to manage. But anyway, that's the way they did it. They came via Mooney Ponds, Sunbury, Mount Macedon, Kyneton, Tasmania, Avoca, and then they struck the Wimmera River and followed the river through. They also stayed at the inn at Glenorchy for a while, and that's where the bullock drivers got drunk and the steers, they lost them. They headed off into the bush. So they spent days there trying to get them back and getting the teamsters sober enough to come on. It was a wet year, the winter of 1849, and it took them 2 days to get from Doon to Horsham. They're getting bogged. Their journey was somewhat delayed at times when they came anywhere near a tavern or a sly grog shanty, which drew the bullock team drivers in like a magnet, leaving the Langlands family to wait their eventual sobering up and them to find the steers. They called it, Scotchman was at Glenorchy at the pub there, named Gleeson from Dundee. Funny the Irish always own the taverns. Yeah. Funny, they always built two things, didn't they, in the early days, churches and taverns, or pubs. And the first church in the Wimmera was a tent out at Veranda Swamp out of Pimpernaya. It was a Methodist congregation there. I was just listening when Jenny was talking about the different denominations, the religions. And I remember back to the old days when there was the Catholics and the Protestants, and we all, joshed one another, fought one another, and sang songs about one another. And, don't play with them, they're Catholics, and no God, they're Protestants, they're Methodists. So, we're also, and it doesn't matter, does it? But thank goodness that most of that's gone out the window. And I remember there was, especially the public service and the police department, if you weren't of a certain religion, you couldn't get a job there. Anyhow. Yeah. The Langlands family arrived here on June the 30th, 1849, and it took them 4 weeks to get from Melbourne to here, which is not a bad effort. Trouble I used to go to get, I remember the first Horsham Cup, Racing Cup, was on the other side of the Wimmera River, and it was opposite, where are we? Where the helicopter lands down the end of Bailey Street. There was a footbridge there across to the other side, and that area down, I think we named it Riverside, yeah. And there was an area there they used to call Round Plain, and that's where the first Horsham Cup was held. And Carter won the first Horsham Cup. And I often reflect back on when I read the article on it. They won the Horsham Cup, and the next day they walked the Horsham to Ararat, and a couple of days later won the races down at Ararat. I mean, Imagine walking a horse to Ararat and then racing it. God. But that's what happened. And when Carter's were out of Brimpan, he needed his horses to put the crop in. And he told his son there's some reason that he had to be represented in Melbourne. And he said to his son, you're going to have to go down there and you're going to have to walk. Now his son walked from Brimpan, and I guess hitchhiked in wagons and what have you, to Melbourne and back because his dad needed the horse to put the crop in. You know, yeah, we got no idea. Life then must have been so difficult. Sorry for verging off like that, but they're just bits and pieces. When they got here, the Langlands family were unyoking their bullocks. They were welcomed by the police troopers they were camped down there. One of the troopers was named Halfpenny. And there were also Alex Smith and his son Charles and James from North Brighton Station. They worked out on the station out there. They lived under canvas and operated their business from the wagons. Then they built a timber shack and then a brick store and the first post office in Horsham. The mail came by horseback until coaches were introduced, Cobb and Co. And they used to come via Pleasant Creek, Stawell, Longanong, Ashens and Glenorchy. See, Dadswell's Bridge was known as a very bad place. It was very wet, very swampy, and so the way to Melbourne was up here, was out up through the high country up here, not down there. That was a no-go zone down around Dadswell's. It was all swampy. Captain Bowden was the mail contractor. Remember Bowden Street here? That's named after him. The Langlands girls went to Melbourne and Geelong. The youngest one, Maggie, was a boarder at the First Ladies' School in Geelong in 1860. Langlands also become friendly with the local Aborigines, especially John. Now, John eventually married one of the stores they built here later. John Langlands, yeah. In 1861, there were 18 homes in Horsham. Bushrangers were very common in those days, and one of them actually held up the Langlands store. They suffered a setback one year when he ordered a heap of material for the store to sell, and the ship sunk with everything on it, and it set them back very financially. I remember stories from the farmers, the older blokes that I've met while I've been in Horsham, telling of the years through the droughts and when crops were not producing, and the Langland store stumped up the money and carried them through to the point where they just about went bankrupt themselves, supplying the local farmers here. And that's what people forget today, that Horsham was established here to support the rural industry. Hawkers were about in the early days. Some people here might remember them, the Indians going around with the wagons. Langland's also opened a store at Tolondo, opposite the lake, over on the corner. There was a shop there for many, many years. I don't know what's there. I don't think it's there now, but it was there for many years. Langlands can be also credited with the station being here and the train service. The original railway line was supposed to come through Matawa, Jung and straight to Dimboola. But John Langlands could see that would make things a little bit more difficult for farmers to get rid of their crops and what have you, or get things to market. So he organised a group of men from Horsham, and they rode to Melbourne and met with the government and persuaded the government to bring the railway line down here and then back up. And even on the forward plan they've got here with the council now is the line going back to where it was originally intended, and a shuttle service from Horsham, a bus service out there to catch the train. Yeah, but we had a train service. 1879, we had a train service from here to Melbourne. Now we've got none. I mean, we're supposed to be getting so smart, but are we real? I mean, they're walking around on the moon and we haven't got a train. Old John Langlands was a leading figure here in Horsham. John reared a family of 13. He was one of George's sons. He was a foundation member of the first Horsham District Roads Board and also member of the Wimmera Shire Council. Also on the hospital board, Mechanics Institute, free library. They must have had a free library then. And he was the Justice of the Peace. And he was chairman of the Horsham Gas Company. I remember the gas works out, used to be down off where Natty Muck Road, wasn't it? Down,
Yeah, not quite.
down the bottom there, yeah.
Wilson Street.
Edward and John, they were sons, yeah. Robert, of course, was in the 9th Australian Cavalry. He was killed in action in Syria. And they gave a great deal to Horsham in by way of land and financial donations, and it's sort of missing today, you know. People like the old foundry there, May and Miller, they put windows in the churches and the fountain, and yeah, they were all giving in the old days, weren't they?
See, Langlands owned all that land from the gardens
Yeah,
right back to the end of the commission home.
yeah.
And my father worked at their dairy.
Oh,
where
yeah.
those big sheds are still there.
Yeah.
And he used to cut the work in the dairy,
Yeah.
dairy cows. I
Yeah.
can remember the paddocks there right down to the river with the cows.
Yeah,
we were told not to go far, but we did.
Did, yeah. Yeah, when Langland Store was going, you all remember Langland Stores here, they employed 92 people. And I can remember, because I used to work there, people would, especially farmers would come in, park their car anywhere in the street, leave the car open, come into the shop and give old Harold Rushbrook and the grocery department there a list, and then go and do whatever. And the women folk used to shop around town, and the orders would be made up and delivered and put in the vehicles. And they got back to them. Imagine doing that now. You'd have no bloody car. Oh dear. Anyhow. Oh, they also had the quarry out there, Mackenzie Creek. Young Peter managed that for many years after Bruce went.
And so did his son James.
And
Yeah, James was.
James,
the
yeah,
last manager
yeah.
there. He's got the concrete.
yeah, concrete plant, sand quarry also at Japarra. Didn't know that. Township of Horsham will always stand as a fitting tribute to the Scotchman, George Langlands. Yeah, well, that's about all I've got there on that. They put out a book, A Century of Trading, which I've got. James is still here, of course, Bruce Peterson, and Helen Fleming, who was a Langlands. Helen, she's still alive, lives down off Williams Road there. Pardon?
I went to school with Helen.
Right, you're that old.
Yes, I am, I'm 81.
Okay. Well, it's just about 11:15. I don't think there's anything else up. I don't know what next meeting is. Oh, wait a minute, what's that? Monday the 26th, that's now. Next local history, Monday the 23rd, Harvey Champness. Remember Harvey from, yeah. And he's going to talk about the disputed territory between Victoria and Tasmania. I don't know why the states all got to be different. You know, going back in history, and, you know, they each had their own army. And I remember reading about the Maori Wars, which were in the 1800s, and a contingent went from New South Wales over to help the British. God knows why they're fighting the Maoris, but that's typical British. Like they're no better than the Vikings. But and Victoria offered troops, and they said, no, we don't want troops from Victoria. We'll only take troops from New South Wales. But then South Australia had their own battalions too. That, you know, we're lucky we didn't finish up like the Yanks with a civil war, the North and the South. I know we do now when the footy's on, but anyway, I don't care. I barrack for Collingwood on top. So.
Feel sorry for you.
And I like Collingwood because everyone hates it. Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you. Okay. One thing for you all go. Do you want to have morning tea during these sessions or not?
No.
You're quite happy as it is. Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks again. Thanks, Trish, for whatever you've done.
I haven't done much.
Eh?
I haven't done much, but that's relatively.
All right, so what we can do now is we can, hopefully it worked, end stream. And then hopefully that uploaded